I'll probably leave them off, but okay, I'll start again. My name is Jill Bayliss. I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct this hearing and to determine the appeals by Mr. Richard Lawton. I think I've got two planning inspectorate colleagues at the back who've come to observe the procedures of a hearing. Is it going to just follow straight away? Thank you. So you might see me chatting to them, but we won't be discussing the case, and the decision is mine and mine alone. These appeals result from the decision of East Cambridgeshire District Council to refuse planning permission and listed building consent for refurbishment and single extension of existing farmhouse, demolition of existing non-historic extension, resubmission following withdrawal of 22000682 FUL at Pratts Green Farmhouse, Pratts Green Farm, Malting End, Kirtling, Cambridgeshire, CB 89HH. The hearing today will be a structured discussion which I shall lead based on an agreed agenda. The purpose is to enable all of you to put forward your points of view and to help me get the information that I need to make my decision. But before we start the discussion, there's a bit of housekeeping I need to do and a few formalities I need to complete, after which I'll explain how I intend to proceed. So now would be a good time to switch off any mobile phones or turn them to silent. We've had the fire alarm test, so if there is a fire alarm, we'll assume it's for real. And could you explain where the evacuation points are?
So fire exit on your in this corner or out of those doors there, and you meet at the barriers in the car park.
Right, okay, thank you. And can you just explain how the microphones work? Can I leave mine on all the time? And then do people need to turn those off before somebody else speaks, or?
I think yours is okay to stay on, however, anyone else will need to switch on and off.
Right, okay.
As they say.
So you can only have one of these on at any one time?
Yes.
Okay. Toilets, are they just outside the door?
Toilets are just outside the door under the clock.
Great.
And they're on the right hand side.
Okay, thank you. So first appearances, I'd like to know who is present and their interest in the case. So representing the appellant, please.
Good morning, Madam. My name is Andrew Parkinson. I'm a barrister instructed by Ed Durrant, who's an associate planner at Pegasus.
Okay.
And I'll let everyone else introduce themselves.
Thank you.
Down the line.
Morning.
Good morning.
It's Dr. Jonathan Turnock. I'm a heritage consultant at Pegasus Group, instructed by the appellant, Mr. Richard Lawton.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Richard Lawton, the appellant.
Good morning.
Morning, Alan Smith from Snell David Architects.
James Snell, Snell David Architects.
Thank you. Right. And Mr. Parkinson, how would you like me to direct the questions? Would you like me to direct them through you or to go to your specialists?
Madam, whatever's most convenient for you. I mean, what I'll probably do is, when we get to the topic, say a few introductory things, but I imagine you want to hear primarily from the experts rather than me. So I'll obviously respect that. Okay, thank you. And representing the council, please.
Good morning, Charlotte Sage, East Cambridgeshire Council Planning Officer. At the time of the decision, I was Charlotte Elston, also the case officer at that time.
Okay. Thank you.
Tony Hilton, and I'm the planning team leader for East Cambs District Council.
Thank you.
Chris Patrick, I'm the East Cambridgeshire Council Conservation Officer.
Thank you. And will anybody else wish to speak at all? Would you like to speak at these proceedings? Okay, can I take your name, please? Sorry, what was your surname again? John? And you're the chair?
Vice Chairman of Kirtling Parish Council.
Thank you. Okay. If you haven't registered your name now, that doesn't preclude you from speaking at the event. And if as you feel, if as we go along you feel you want to say something, then please raise your hand and I'll get to you as soon as I'm able. Is anybody from the press present? No. And I understand the event is being live streamed through the council's website. Does anybody else intend to film or record the event? No. Okay. Thank you. So obviously we'll make sure that any filming or recording is carried out responsibly, and please make sure it doesn't interfere with the smooth running of the hearing. Thank you. Notification letters. I have a copy of the council's letters of notification of the appeal hearing and the hearing arrangements letter, and those appear to be satisfactory. And with regard to the new ministerial statement, Building the Homes We Need, and the consultation on the planning reforms to the NPPF, do either party consider that these have any relevance to your case? We start with the council.
No, none from us.
And yourselves?
We're in the same position.
Okay. I have copies of the representations made in response to the planning application and listed building consent consultations and the appeal notifications, and I'll take these into account in reaching my decision. So I've already been to see the appeal site from the road, so I have a general awareness of the site and its context, but nevertheless I propose to undertake a site visit later today, and as I need to go onto private land and into the farmhouse, I'll need to be accompanied by a representative from the appellant and the council. Does anybody else intend to go on site? Okay, I'll make the arrangements towards the end of the proceedings, if that's okay. So at this stage, my intention is to close the hearing here in this room to ensure that interested parties can participate, and because conducting a discussion on site can be difficult. If so, the site visit will be solely to enable me to see the site and its surroundings, but I will not be able to listen to any representations or discussions on site, and therefore it's important that you make any comments here before we leave. As we'll be talking about two listed buildings on the site, please draw my attention to any places or vantage points or features that I need to look at on site as we go along, and I'll add them to my list. And I'll take these into account when I do my visit. It's not my intention to seek any applications for costs, but if any are to be made, this should be done here before the site visits, and there's an item on the agenda for this purpose. In addition, I have a power to initiate an award of costs, whether or not any applications have been made by the parties, and if I were to do this, it would follow the written process with the relevant party after the appeal decision is issued. I've produced an agenda, which I hope you've all got copies of. Have you got copies at the back? Can you? I think there's perhaps some spares floating about. Thank you. This highlights what I consider to be the main issue and other points on which I require further clarification. And I'll use this for as the basis for our discussion. And based on the information before me, I consider the main issue to be whether the proposal would preserve the significance of designated heritage assets or any of the features of special architectural or historic interest that they possess. And the list of buildings that we'll be discussing are Pratts Green Farmhouse and the setting of Ashley Barn. I'm conscious that both reasons for refusal mention that the proposal is likely to have an adverse effect on the character and appearance of the locality to the detriment of local visual amenity. Now, I've taken this to mean that in the council's view, the extension may be harmful to the way in which these listed buildings are experienced. I've not taken it to mean that the proposal would affect the character and appearance of the wider area more generally. I'm happy to have character and appearance as a main issue, but I don't see any submissions arguing that. So is my interpretation correct on that matter?
That's correct, ma'am. Yes.
Right, okay. Okay, so we'll stick with that one main issue there. Are you happy with that, Mr. Parkinson?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Under other matters, if I were to conclude that there is harm, this will include a discussion on public benefits and the heritage balance. And then I've put an item on the end for concluding remarks. Are both parties content with the main issue or have any comments on the agenda? Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the statement of common ground signed by both parties. Has everybody seen this document? Yeah. Okay. We can discuss this under item 2. I saw last week, I've received an email from yourself, I think, Mr. Parkinson, asking for me to consider 2 legal cases. Can you just explain that for me?
Thank you, Madam. Yes, it's two cases and it relates to item 4 on the agenda. So if you do find some harm, how to carry out balance between heritage harm and public benefits, including heritage benefits. One of them, the case of K, is already referred to in the heritage statement.
I've seen that, yeah.
But we thought it would be helpful if you had the full case. The other case, case of Juden, simply summarises the existing case law on how to carry out that balance.
Right,
And
okay.
also at what stage in the decision-making process to do it. So there's probably only 1 paragraph in that case to refer to. I don't think the principle will be controversial.
Okay.
I've got hard copies if there's no objection to me handing them up.
Yeah. Are you happy with that?
Well, as far as I know, we received a close of play on Friday afternoon, rather a late submission.
Well, I believe one of them is already mentioned in the heritage statement, so it is already in the public domain. And you know, we will be discussing the balance of benefits versus harm, so I'm inclined to accept it.
Thank you, Madam.
Okay, thank you.
I
I
mean,
will discuss this under item 4.
If it would help, I can, when I hand them out, just indicate the paragraphs in particular that I'm going to go to. That would
Yes, yeah.
Help the council. Do you want a hard copy as well? You've got a hard copy.
Okay. Thank you. So the statement of common ground also includes suggested conditions that might be appropriate were I to allow these appeals. I note that some are agreed and some are not agreed. Are there any further updates at this stage?
No further updates.
No.
No, we had quite a lot of discussion to get to this point, so I think our positions are fairly fixed at this point.
Okay. Thank you. And these will form the basis of our discussion later and what conditions might be appropriate were I to allow the appeals. This is standard procedure and it doesn't indicate that I've made up my mind on the case, and nor will the discussion affect or weaken the council's position in relation to the proposal. The statement of common ground also lists the relevant plans that the council made its decision on. Are there any other plans at all? No, just those that are listed. So all documents and evidence should already have been provided. I'm not inviting or expecting any additional evidence, but if you intend to submit any, please tell me now. No. During the discussion, I shall invite particular people to contribute at particular times. And if you want to make a point or you feel you're moving on, that I'm moving on before you said all you want to, please do tell me. There'll be no formal presentation of cases or cross-examination unless I specifically agree to it. And if anybody's got any queries, then please do direct them through me and I'll see if there are things that I want to find out about. The purpose of the hearing is not to repeat what has been submitted in the written statements and comments, but to clarify the issues to enable me to make a fair and just decision. So therefore, if only one person could speak at once, that would be helpful for me. And I'll also be taking notes of the discussion. So I apologise if I'm not looking at you while I'm speaking, and you may see me nodding or saying thank you after somebody has spoken, but this is merely me acknowledging it rather than necessarily agreeing with it. We'll see how we go with regard to timing. We'll take a break for lunch at an appropriate time, and I aim to get out on site by early afternoon, hopefully. And then I aim to finish the proceedings no later than 5 o'clock. So are there any questions at this stage about the procedural side of the hearing? No. Okay, so now I'll begin the discussion with item 2, preliminary matters and statement of common ground. So I have 2 appeals on this site. They relate to the planning application, excuse me, and listed building consent for the same scheme. To avoid duplication, I will deal with them together, except where I indicate otherwise. I note the matters agreed and the matters not agreed. I just wonder, Mr. Parkinson, firstly, if I can just look at paragraph 911 of the statement of common ground. Which refers to the statutory duty under section 66(1). I was wondering why there's no mention of the statutory duty under section 16(2) of the same act about considering whether to grant listed building consent.
There should be.
Oh, right, okay.
I think that's right. There should be as well. I think that was just an omission on all of our parts,
Right.
because both duties are in play.
Okay. Because throughout the documentation, it talks about 66(1), but not 16(2). So we're happy that we're talking about both statutory duties. And if we can look at paragraph 10.1, talks about changes to the setting of the farmhouse. I was wondering whether the issue is not regarding the impact on the farmhouse itself rather than its setting, as it's an extension.
I think the reason why it's framed like that is because at 9.7, I think it's common ground that there's no direct impact on the fabric of the farmhouse. So the impact is whether there's harm to the significance of the farmhouse through development within its setting.
Even though it's going to be attached?
Even though it's going to be attached, because there's no direct harm, it's development that would fall within the setting of the farmhouse. I mean, I suppose that 10.1 could be changed to whether the proposal would harm the significance of the farmhouse, full stop.
That would
And then
be-
in considering that,
Yeah.
recognising what's agreed at 9.7, that, and I think you're probably right, that's a better way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But then in considering that, recognising at 9.7, it's common ground that there's no direct impact on the fabric of the farmhouse itself through the development.
Okay. Have you got any comments to make on that?
Well, I would generally assume that a direct physically attached extension does have an impact on the fabric of a building.
But that may be the case, but we proceeded on the basis of statement common ground, which couldn't be clearer, that the method of connection will have no direct harmful impacts to the historic fabric of the farmhouse. And that is the way in which the extension is attached. There's no suggestion that the internal and external repairs cause any harm. In fact, it's agreed that there are benefits. So you proceeded on the basis that it's common ground that there will be no harm to the fabric.
Okay, well, perhaps we can move on and we can
Yeah.
drill into that.
We can drill into
shortly, can't we? Okay. Thank you. And just for, if I can come to the council, just for clarity to start off, if we set the listed building issues to one side for a moment, would the proposal meet the council's planning policies for extensions regarding the principle and its design and size?
So that would be with regard to policy how 8 we have. I must admit that was not included within the submission, the officer's report that we had created. 2 seconds. So the policy for extension replacement of dwellings in the countryside, so we'd be looking at the extension only. In terms of that, we'd be looking at, would the extension be in keeping with height, scale and character of the original dwelling, which we felt that the extension was not subservient. The height was excessive, whilst we did agree that the design was of particularly attractive design in terms of height, scale and character of the original dwelling. And the extension to that, we'd agree that it wouldn't meet that test.
It wouldn't.
It wouldn't meet the test under How 8 in terms of its height, scale and character.
Okay, I'm just looking at that policy. Mr. Parkinson, do you have a comment on that at all?
Yes, just a couple of comments. And how 8 isn't cited in the reasons for refusal, but I think the key bit in the statement of common ground that relates to this is paragraph 9.11, which we looked at earlier, which records that if the proposal preserves the farmhouse and Ashley's for the purpose of section 661, then the proposal is acceptable in all other respects. So in terms of how 8, the agreed position is that if you're satisfied that there's no harm to the significance of either building, then there is compliance with how 8, i.e. the proposal is acceptable in all other respects. There's no suggestion that you could find that the proposals preserve the significance of both buildings, but nonetheless find conflict with how
Yeah, which we're going to want to explore, so.
it stands or falls with
Yeah.
your main issue.
Yeah. You got anything further? Is it mainly how 8 that will be the,
In terms of that policy and the requirements of that policy, yes, obviously there'd be ENV2 as well, which is our trying to find the name of it. It's our policy on design. Again, which near enough runs along the same lines as policy how 8, but in more detail regarding design. And I believe that was one of the reasons for refusal of the policies that was included. But again, the whole argument sort of goes back to that same in 9.11 with regards to whether it does preserve the farmhouse or not.
yeah. Okay, have you got anything further on the policies to add at this stage? No? Mr. Parkinson, no? Okay. Right, that's all I wanted to discuss on the statement of common ground at this stage. Just by way of introduction and to set the scene, would it be possible to hear directly from Mr. Lawton to just understand the background to the farmhouse? When did you buy it? How long had it been on the market? When it was last lived in? Have you lived in it or living in it? Just so I can understand, you know, the context for the building that we're talking about today.
Certainly. So I bought the property in 2021, I think it is now. And basically I currently live in London, but want to move out to the countryside. So that was the rationale for the property. We looked around for quite a long time actually, and came across this property which my wife and I basically fell in love with when we saw the property. Although that was more on the on the internet, we hadn't appreciated until we actually got to the site what the state of repair of the property was. And we were quite sort of shocked actually. But nonetheless, we liked the property so much, we decided we wanted to buy it. And to be honest, at the time, part of the rationale was I felt, you know, it was is a beautiful building, and I really wanted to do two things. One is redevelop the property because it's a beautiful building, and I appreciated it was listed, and I felt that's one of the reasons, you know, I wanted to take it on as a challenge, but also with the potential to make it into a beautiful family home. That's, I mean, just in terms of the questions you asked, one of the issues when I was looking at the property, talking to the owner, I don't know how long it had been on the market, but I know she was struggling to sell it. Two reasons. One is the extent of work that needed to be done. It's going to cost a lot of money just to put this property into a state that people can live in it. It's not habitable at the moment, and we do use it, but it's more in the summer. So for example, there's no central heating or anything like that. The building's not watertight. When it's driving rain, the water comes in through the windows. I mean, the building's in a pretty bad state of repair. I don't think much has been done to it since, I think there was a major renovation in the 1970s, I think. But since, certainly for a long period, there's just been not much renovation work for, I can't comment on the reasons why, but that's the state in which I sort of took on the property. So we're going to have to spend, you know, a lot of money on it, and I felt, you know, I was able to do two things. Hopefully, one is create a beautiful family home, but also give a little bit back to, you know, the local community in the area, and renovate this house, which has been, you know, gradually on a decline for years and years. And you know, I think I can't speak for people in the village, but I think the view is it's in a, people comment on you know, wow, we can't believe you took that on. Or you must be having to do tons of work to it. Those are the kind of comments that we've received, which is all, I mean, as you will see when you do the site visit. We thought very carefully about the extension, and the rationale for that is what we wanted to do is keep the character of the original building, but also make it more of a sort of modern family home, in the sense of it has a beautiful garden, and at the moment you can't really sort of enjoy the house and the garden together. And what we were trying to do is, with the extension, is open it up a little bit so that the house basically flows through into the garden in a way that obviously with a modern house you have. But we tried to do that in a very sympathetic way to the original building. Worked very hard with the architect team who sitting alongside me, and we really thought we got the balance right. We tried to do the most minimal thing we could. We're taking off this horrible extension on the side and building. We'd like to build something on the back, which I think everyone agrees they like the design of it. And we thought that was basically we thought we'd come up with a very good solution. And basically, as far as the public will be concerned, it will just look like the original house, what you can see from the road, and the horrible 1970s extension will be gone, and you won't be able to see the extension around the back. So that was the
Okay.
logic to it, and we were sort of quite careful with all of that. And along the way as well, we prior to making the application, we did a pre-application procedure with the council, and one of the disappointing things out of that was when we asked for feedback and were told that the council didn't like what was proposed. We were told that there's nothing else, there was no compromise. So when it comes to issues such as height and scale, they were issues that it wasn't raised at the pre-app. It's just been raised later on, and those kind of points, to the extent
Okay.
of concerns may have been able to be addressed, but I wasn't given the opportunity.
Right, okay, thank you for that.
So I probably spoke a little bit
No,
too
that's
long.
fine. No, it's
trying to give
it's
you-
just useful to just,
Yeah.
get it from the horse's mouth kind of thing, just to sort of
Yeah,
understand,
yeah.
it's your building and what
Something
you're
that-
trying to achieve and what the issues are that
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
experiencing. So was it, when it was for sale, was it still being lived in at that time?
It was, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
We'll obviously probe into those matters as we go through, but is there anything you want to say at this stage?
I think just very briefly, just to talk about the pre-application stage and the matters to do with the withdrawn application that was under a different case officer who still currently works at the council. And it was sort of just to say that the matters that were discussed as part of that pre-application were different to the ones that we see before us today, and included a larger glazed link, a replacement garage, and an annex sort of room to the top of that, as well as the extension. And then we have the notes that have been provided as part of the design and access statement from that particular meeting. And that sort of went through, it sort of defined where and when the council would sort of put a marker down. But there was conversation about compromise in terms of a detached building or an outbuilding of the garden, so you could have that relationship between the dwelling and the garden itself.
Right, okay. Okay, thank you. Anything to come back on that point?
And then just on the pre-app, and we might come onto this later. I mean, we've got the notes for some design and access statement, but what's recorded as being said is that conservation officer considered that buildings like this should remain as they are, and that Pratts Green Farmhouse was a good project to be used as an example of this. And we asked whether a smaller extension might be more favourably received, but we were told that even with a reduction in width and length, an extension would be unacceptable. And this comes back to one of the issues here, which is that the council's position is that any extension on this building is unacceptable in principle. But we'll obviously come back to that
Got a
later.
question about that, yeah, so we could come on to that. Okay, is everybody happy that I'll move on to the main issue then? Yeah. So the main issue, as I've already described, so just to structure this, I want to talk about the significance of the farmhouse and its setting. Firstly, then more briefly talk about the significance of setting of Ashley Barn. Then talk about the effect of the external works on those listed buildings. And then talk about the internal alterations and modernisation and repairs to the farmhouse. And then obviously after that, we'll talk about, should I find any harm, what level of harm that may be. So, significance of farmhouse. I've read what you've both said on significance, and the statement of common ground confirms that the statement on the heritage statement is agreed by both parties, which is really helpful for me. I wonder perhaps if we could start with Mr. Turnock, please. If you could just, with regard to this appeal, can you explain to me what the crux of the heritage significance is for the farmhouse?
Yes, of course. I mean, having approached this, what struck me immediately was that there seemed to be this fundamental mischaracterization of the significance of the farmhouse from the council. So it's described as a modest building that's vulnerable to over-aggrandizement. Now, when I look at it, it's at its core, this 16th century hall house of 3 bays that obviously has gone through a lot of change. And onto that then is this considerable what appears to be a late 17th century addition, the eastern wing. So immediately, I should say that the hall house itself, as a dwelling of that period, is a relatively high status dwelling. The fact that it then has this, considerably larger eastern wing added in the 17th century is a sign that the occupants of that time were looking to aggrandize the dwelling further. And then not only that, but it seems probably late 18th, early 19th century, there's then an aggrandizement of the new principal northern elevation with the integration of some sash windows. Obviously benefits of increased light levels, but it seems as though for passers-by travelling Malting End, it's a sign of the status and wealth of the occupants at that time. Clearly then there's refurbishment internally. As I've set out in the statement, there's obviously some parts of the building that don't contribute or even detract. The side extension of around 1981, for example. Some of those internal works have clearly been detrimental to the historic fabric. Those that we seem to think have occurred in the 1970s, some of the cementitious repairs, impeding vapor permeability. You'll see during the site visit more some of the effects that has had on the building. So that's fabric. In terms of them looking at setting, probably the best thing to look at is the historic map progression that I've presented in my statement, which just shows the level of change. So initially quite a constrained garden curtilage, and to the rear, a boundary and potentially some orchard planting. And over time, some of that orchard planting has been cleared. And the most notable modern change has been essentially the enlargement of that garden curtilage. And it kind of feeds into this aggrandizement of the property in a way.
Yeah. I'm just
yes.
finding the historic OS maps that you
Oh, yes.
page 36.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off as you were.
No, that's no problem. I mean, it's just to go through these just to show how this curtilage has then extended. And I suppose that's the critical point that, in the front garden area, there's this traditional flint wall. There's elements that are clearly historic and illustrate the historic boundary divisions and the character of that setting. But equally, when you go to this rear part of the garden where the extension is proposed,
it's very much a modern garden curtilage when we, you know, compare it to the historic mapping. It has changed considerably over time.
So just going back to the building itself, the list description talks about the L-shaped plan. So how important is the plan form of the building to its significance?
Sure. So essentially the listing description is of the time where it's purely descriptive. It's not a modern list entry where significance is clearly set out. So the L shape there is, as I say, it's clearly descriptive. There's nothing more to it. But, you know, clearly, if we think about the form, we've got this cross-wing arrangement. We can see the 3-bay hall house. We can see this extension that, you know, those obviously do contribute to the significance. Absolutely.
Okay, we go over to the council, please. Mr. Patrick.
It's Patrick.
Patrick, sorry.
Well, my description of it as modest isn't in as much as it's a 1.5-story vernacular building. I mean, there are variations in status, but we have a lot of thatched cottages in the south of the district. They all have very, very similar family characteristics. It's not unknown for buildings to have a certain amount of subtle evolution. I wouldn't expect any building in this district to have its original fenestration, but none of those things have significantly promoted the building. It is, by the standards of the district, a modest vernacular building. There are grander houses in the area, they tend not to be thatched.
Okay. Do you have anything else to add about your interpretation of the significance of the building?
Well, part of its significance is that it has remained relatively untouched. Yes, it had a crosswing 400 years ago, but it's not had any substantial addition since then. That's quite unusual in any district.
And do you have any views about the L-shaped plan, whether that contributes to the building's significance?
Well, clearly it illustrates a very early addition 400 years ago. Crosswing buildings, again, very characteristic of the area.
And Mr. Turner, have you got anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I suppose just to say that we're looking here at potentially 100 years or more between the earliest core and this addition. So it's not a very truncated timescale here of enlargement in a tight window. It's actually a much larger spread, really. And also just to pick up on subtle evolution, I think, again, the site visit will be helpful here just to see internally. It's not just about external form, although admittedly there is this modern side extension. It's also just the general refurbishment internally. You'll see that it's overwhelmingly modern in character, I would say, in many of the rooms.
Mr. Patrick, have you got anything further to add?
I haven't seen the inside of the building, but again, it's not unusual for modern interior finishes to conceal much earlier fabric.
So if there's nothing anybody wants to add about the significance of the building, anything further? I just want to just briefly touch about on the setting of the farmhouse, but in terms of the building itself, does anybody want to Add anything else at this stage?
Just very briefly, the building is, as Chris Partick explained, is unique in that it's not as much has happened to it as many similar dwellings have. It is important, though, that it is a grade 2 listed building. It's not grade 1 for the significance of its form of originality. It's grade 2, and therefore there are expectations and limitations that are applied to the different grading, which I think should be taken into account. It's also important to state that that most of the internal and fabric changes to the actual building are not of an issue they're not in debate. They're agreed that we could do what we are planning to do to the actual building itself. This is much more about whether an extension is harmful to the things that we have just been discussing, the L-shaped plan, the 3 bays, etc. And that is, I think, the point of this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, I see from the statements of common ground that the internal works are agreed between the two parties, but I will need to delve into that because obviously I've got a statutory duty to have regard to the impact of that on the significance of the building, if indeed there is any impact. But thank you, that's helpful. Does the council want to come back on that at all?
I mean, listed building grades are a handy rule of thumb as to national significance. There are some very, very significant grade 2 listed buildings, even though they're in the majority. The legislation doesn't discriminate between grades.
Okay, anything else? Anybody? Sorry. Okay.
Can I just say what I've got to say?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Lost my wife at home. Unfortunately, Alzheimer's.
Do you want to just pull up a chair for a moment and
I can understand. I don't. You sure? Yes.
so it's Mr. Kirtling, isn't it?
Mr. Kitely.
Kitely, yeah.
Right, on behalf of Kirtling Parish Council, we supported the first application, which we saw nothing wrong with. We were equally supported the second application, which we thought didn't see was amiss. And our parish council, we discussed things, and I don't feel that there's certain points that have come up that are relevant. Now, over the years, there have been extensions on many houses over the years, whether it's Georgian, there's been new facades put on houses, and I appreciate there wasn't the regulations then. But I feel that number one, or several points, do people really think that people are going to drive to Kirtling and say, what a wonderful example of a thatched farmhouse in a rural setting? I don't think that people, I would think most of the population couldn't give a damn. The other thing which I think is relevant is it says it's a farmhouse. There hasn't been land with that farmhouse for many, many years. Now, I've lived in the village for 66 years. There have been extensions on other houses. There's which I think the architect used in the first place, around the top of the village, Hunter's Moon, which I think Mr. Lawton's aware of. And that was a very old cottage. They got an ultra-modern extension on the back. Right, if you could say it doesn't fit in with the environment, but it was built, nothing problem. There have been other extensions in the village, which personally I don't like, from a personal point of view. And the other point, several points, I don't think the neighbours actually have objected, and that is Ashley. I don't see that they've got any no problem at all as far as it being renovated, and the extension. Now, as far as I'm concerned, having lived in a village for so long, I mean, we've seen some planning applications come in which we don't like, but they've been built. And another point is that if this house was open to the public, I can fully understand the guidelines, whether it be English heritage or what have you. But I don't think that it's relevant to use that as, whether you say it's not relevant, the fact is the house will not be open to the public. Nobody's going to walk in Mr. Lawton's front room and say what a wonderful house it is unless they're invited. I cannot see any problem with that. I can see problems with that as far as that goes. It cannot be seen from the road, which again I think is very relevant. And apart from that, there's been no comments from the neighbours, future generations, and there's been other extensions. Anyway, that is my personal view and also the parish council's view. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Right, so I have to leave you, but
Thank you. Has anybody got any comments on that before the gentleman leaves? No. Okay. So let's just look at the setting of the farmhouse again. So what I need to understand is where can I best appreciate and experience it from? So perhaps should we start with the council, please? And if you can suggest any places that when I go out on site, I need to have a look at it from, that would be helpful.
Well, the lane to Malting End is the principal public viewpoint. You get a sort of sequence of views as you travel from either east to west or west to east along there. That's to the north. You'll certainly see the principal elevation of the farmhouse to good effect. You'll see the L plan. You'll also see its relationship to its former farmstead, which is the separately listed barn, Ashley's to the east. But you'll appreciate that although they're in separate ownership now, they're clearly part and parcel of one farmstead grouping.
And what about its rear? An agricultural context? How?
No, well, there are some fairly tangential views from the west towards the rear of the site. I wouldn't say that they're absolutely key public views. They're intermittent. They'll be interrupted to some extent by roadside vegetation. And clearly you have to stand within the building's grounds to get the best view of the rear elevation. But again, public vantage points are not the sole determinant in heritage protection.
And Mr. Turnock, have you got some?
I mean, I broadly agree with that. That's correct that those key views are really on that immediate approach at Malting End, where you can see what I talked about, that refenestrated north elevation of the farmhouse with those sash windows. We'll get onto it, but also the appreciation with Ashley's, that group value in terms of, yeah, the rear elevation and the rear garden area, that's, private area. And if we look at the form and design of that rear elevation of the house, very limited fenestration, very clear that that wasn't designed to be admired or appreciated in the manner of the principal north elevation.
So, I mean, I'll see for myself when I go on site, but if I'm standing in that rear garden, am I surrounded by vegetation or is it an open landscape?
It's a large open, so it's what I talked about with the extended modern garden curtilage, but there are also hedgerow boundaries, some trees, and then beyond that is then wider agricultural landscape.
So if I stood in the fields at the back, I would be able to see the rear elevation, then it's not completely screened by domestic boundaries.
No, you would be able to see it, but as I'm saying, that's a private field. The closest there is a public right of way that I've walked, but the farmhouse is so distant that there's not a real perception of its rear elevation, the extent that you can appreciate its special architectural and historic interest.
Okay. So where's the footpath? not picked that up.
I'm not sure if there is actually an OS map anywhere, but that would be the place to look. And if you go past the frontage of the house, you turn right past Ashley's and follow that lane up, you can then come off that lane and there's a right of way across the field.
You have an indication of where it might be? Not, does it go off the map? Is it?
Yeah.
So you start on the track and then it,
Yeah, you go down the track and then you veer right.
okay. So maybe when we have the site visit, if you can just see where it is and then point it out to me on site, so I could just see where I might be able to stand and get a distant view. Thank you. Sorry, was there anything else you wanted to point out?
Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else about setting of the farmhouse to raise at this stage?
I think just for me as well is just to, as a point for you to stand to look when you view the property later, is to the west of Malting End. So I don't know if you've got the location plan in front of you, but as you look at it, if you go around further to the left, as you just go around the bend, you can see quite, although there is landscaping there, we can't, obviously by planning, we can't rely on that landscaping as a buffer. But you can see the extent to where that extension would come out and the setting of that with Ashley's behind it.
Okay, so in terms of this,
In terms of that map you have there, if we
just off-
follow the road to the left,
off the map,
just off to the map
slightly.
to the left, yeah.
Yeah. That maybe is dependent on the time of year, because I did walk along there yesterday and I couldn't really see anything, but I'll have another look. And I'll also look and see where that footpath is.
Can I just jump in, Mom, and say I've got some photographs taken in the winter, so if you would like any winter views, if that would be
Right, okay.
helpful at all, then I'm happy to share those.
I think I'll have a look on site. I think I'll be able to envisage what I could see from what position from actually standing in the garden, I think. But thank you for that.
Sorry, could I just mention one thing? The importance of the view of the existing sort of garden utility room, which is very prominent from the road compared to what we're proposing.
Yeah. So, Mr. Turnock, let's talk about Ashley Barn now. Just very briefly, if you can talk to me, tell me about the crux of the heritage significance of that barn, and then whether the farm or how the farmhouse contributes towards its setting, please.
Yes, of course. Just going to jump to my relevant part of the statement. So from 6.8 of my statement, really, that's laid out. In essence, that significance is principally embodied within its physical fabric. This kind of core timber frame, thought to be late 16th century in origin. Clearly, there have been alterations have been converted to domestic use. So the thing to point out is some of the glazing, some of the dormer windows that have been inserted since. And this kind of comes on then to set in. And thinking then of, so if I go sort of through its surviving elements of the historic farm complex or some of the other outbuildings that are connected to it. Obviously, Pratts Green Farmhouse, but specifically the building that I'm talking about here and the historic relationship between the two. Then there's Malting End, the lane and the junction, specifically in close proximity where you're seeing farmhouse, barn in close conjunction, you're appreciating that group value, that spatial relationship. And then finally, the Shrine Agricultural Land, where that's readily experienced in conjunction with the barn, but obviously recognising that that historic functional association has since been severed, given the residential conversion. I think the other thing to say in terms of views is this is it's a traditional agricultural building. It wasn't designed with views in mind, certainly not views out from the building. And in effect, if we're thinking of the extension, I know the council have raised views of the extension from the barn I just want to point out that those dormers in the rear there, those later residential insertions, they're not design views, they're not contributing to the significance of the barn. And the other thing to say is that where the extension is going to be positioned, that rear garden curtilage, obviously that understanding domestic character of setting a farmhouse, that makes sense, but it tells us nothing about the special architectural and historic interest of the barn itself, that domestic curtilage.
Okay, Mr. Patrick, have you got something to add to that?
I generally accept the characterisation of the barn. I mean, it's significant that it's individually listed. It was clearly of sufficient quality in its own right, rather than just curtilage listed. In terms of the impacts of its conversion, they're half of the cost for barn conversions. Whether it was designed for views or not, clearly non-habitable buildings weren't, but that doesn't reflect its current use. So, you know, it is a dwelling. It has a relationship with the farmhouse.
And what do you think are the best places to stand and see the relationship between the two?
Again, from Malting's Lane to the north, as I said before, you get a very clear sense of them being a farmstead grouping.
And what about the rear? Any?
I've never been into the Ashley's site.
Okay. Mr. Turnock, have you stood and looked at the visual relationship at the rear?
Only insofar as I've been in the rear garden of Pratts Green Farmhouse.
Yeah.
Obviously from that I can appreciate that, again, whether it's useful to go back to historic mapping, but in essence the working yard is to the east.
Yeah.
Obviously associated with the barn, that is now a domestic garden area. So I've noted within my statement that from that curtilage of the barn, you were going to glimpse the upper part of the extension, but that is a much changed curtilage. And again, it boils down really to what were their design views. Well, there weren't in that instance. It wasn't in essence a design views from working farmyard to the farmhouse. And in that sense, the extension is not going to have an adverse impact.
Okay. So, thank you. Let's move on to the extension itself then. So, I'd like to understand the design process for how the extension has taken the form that it has. So perhaps who could talk to me about this?
I think Mr. Turlock in the first instance, and
Okay.
then maybe one or two of the architects as well.
Yes, so I should say that obviously I've come to this later. You know, the architects will be able to talk about the actual evolution, but in terms of my understanding of siting, height and scale, I mean, the rear siting it follows the classic example of conservation principles, historic England's guidance, you know, the fact that a subservient location, i.e. the rear, is completely appropriate. I know there's been talk of this contrasting building line, but if we look at the established form of the farmhouse, it's this cross-wing arrangement. Clearly the design of the rear extension has been designed to complement and sustain that. It echoes that cross-wing arrangement that's already been established.
Sorry, how does it complement the cross-wing arrangement?
In terms of perpendicular arrangements. So you've
I
got,
see.
yeah, north wing, east wing, perpendicular, and then the new extension again echoing that perpendicular form. I suppose the other thing to say is that because there is this glazed connection, which again is, you know, very much in accordance with conservation principles, you've got a clear visual contrast between the new and the old, and you can clearly see the original footprint of the building, its original form, that is clearly legible, that won't be affected by the extension.
Thank you. the architects, so do you want to?
Yeah, so to echo that, yeah, the design was with a clear separation via a link, and it's designed as a clearly contemporary extension, but with materials that have some relationship to the existing cottage.
Sorry, how do the materials have a relationship? We've got timber, boarding and zinc roof.
Yeah, so the basic form, the pitch follows the pitch of the existing, so it has a traditional pitched form. In terms of the scale we were talking about earlier, the width of the extension is deliberately slightly less than the original wing. So it's about 5 meters compared to the original wing, which to actually read the original wing, you have to look on the north elevation. And that's between 5.3 at the base and 5.1 at the top. So the roof is lower, and I think it's significantly lower because of the bulk of the thatch as well. There was some talk about the height to the underside of the barge board, but actually when you take into account the thatch of the original wing is about 6.8 meters high, and we're at 6 meters high, so that's why I think it's subservient. The materials, the idea is, rather than having, where you're talking about, for example, the zinc, rather than having a slavish imitation of the materials, is to reflect the sort of monolithic appearance of thatch. And then the timber is picking up on some of the timber that's on the existing garage.
Is the garage historic?
No, not particularly, no. Then the main gable itself is fully glazed, and the glazing wraps around the corner, and that's to give that's to hit one of the key points of the brief, which is to open up the relationship to the garden, which at the moment there's a relatively blank wall to the rear. And then the gable is screened with timber, which will help reduce the solar gain, but whilst letting some light through. The link itself, sort of jumping back a stage to about the impact on the building. We looked at two positions where the extension might go. One is the existing extension, the modern extension to the west. Yeah, to the west. So basically, we're looking at locations where we could reduce the impact on the historic fabric. So we were looking originally on the west, where the existing fairly horrid extension is. But in the end, we discounted that because of the views. It will be much more prominent in the public realm. So that's why we switched to looking at the rear. And then the rear in particular, at that corner, there's a pair of French casement doors, which are relatively modern. And more importantly, the materials around there are modern. So where we're actually joining on with the glazed link, there'll be no loss of fabric, historic fabric. There'll be loss of fabric, but it's all modern. So that's why the location was looked at. We'd also looked at some schemes for Richard where we were looking at reusing the existing garage and rebuilding with more space in the roof and extending towards the rear, which was the subject of the original withdrawn application. And that was discounted for various reasons, some of them to do with cost and also the way that it linked the building. So trying to link into the existing garage location meant the link was going to be bigger. And I think that was one of the comments on the original application. So we were looking at scaling back the overall size of the extensions and in particular the link, and that's why the link ended up in that location, is because it reduces the impact to basically nothing, I think. The other issue with extending over the garage is that that then did begin to impact on the what you see from the public realm, whereas our extension is now pushed to the rear and it's very much subservient and away from the public realm. Whereas when we look at the extensions in the garage area, that is more prominent on the front elevation.
May I add just a small thing? Also, the garage, worse, the garage would have had more of an impact onto the Ashley's farm setting, if that was a reason. Just to reinforce the design is not necessarily, I think it's recognised by the team from East Cambs as being of a high quality design, which of course this house deserves, rather than the poor quality extension to the side that it currently exists. In our view, a clear-cut, contemporary, though proportionally appropriate extension with potentially agricultural or more modern contemporary materials is appropriate because it's so easily read as something that is clearly not of historic value. And I think as architects, we have a duty to ensure that we're not fudging the eye, so to speak. We're not producing something that is kidding anybody to be something else. Thank you.
Okay, that's helpful because I was trying to understand the design, because obviously the materials are not reflective of materials on the farmhouse itself, but your explanation that it's sort of are you saying that it's sort of reminiscent of an outbuilding but in a contemporary form?
Correct. The metal roof is often seen of various forms on farm buildings. It is clearly an extension. It is not more of the same. And I think sometimes to accentuate that with the materiality that is appropriate, although different, is a vital part of our duty when working with older buildings.
If I could just pick up on that, I mean, something else that was taken into account was the council's design guide. And in particular, for extensions, it acknowledges that it's possible to create modern, high-quality designs using contemporary materials in the context of listed buildings. And also that construction of a low link, often in glass, is an effective way of maintaining the visual integrity of the original building. So that was also taken into account in the design. And as I understand it, the council doesn't take any issue with the materials. I know obviously you've got your statutory duty, but it's not a point that the council takes in terms of this choice of a modern design. It's acknowledged in the statement of common ground to be a high quality design at paragraph 9.1.
Okay. Does the council want to come back on that discussion? You know, if you're telling me the extension is harmful, can you explain where the harm is and how harmful it is?
There's never really been any dispute over the design rationale or the quality of the design. I fully accept the architect's rationale for extending or linking to the location where they propose, because that's the line of least resistance. That's where there's already a pair of French doors. This is not dissimilar to things that I have supported elsewhere in my career. It's quite a well-established approach for extending historic buildings nowadays. Council's position has always been that this building in particular can't stand any extensions from any elevation, and that it's a very well-preserved building as it stands, and there's a public interest in maintaining it at that state.
So the council's view is that this is it, the building cannot be extended in any way.
There's no easy, painless way of extending this building. The natural way of extension would have been from the east gable. That's what would have been done before there were heritage protections. But both the architects and I agreed that that would have involved breaking through a timber frame wall, so it was always going to be too destructive. So
So that's the eastern gable.
Yeah,
that you're talking
yeah,
about
towards Ashley's.
through towards the garage.
Yeah, I mean, that was never even in play because we both recognised that that would be unacceptable on any level. They chose a line of lesser resistance, but like I said, we've never really conceded that this building requires an extension or will benefit from it.
Can I jump in as well?
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, the approach that we'd taken sort of follows the principles in paragraph 35 of the GPA 3, and sort of setting out from the earliest outset about any potential to enhance or harm the significance of the asset through the principle of development alone. So that's sort of the basis of legalities that we follow through on that. And we did agree, certainly in our statement of case and statement of common ground as well, that the design is of attractive design, but in our opinion, the harm forms through the harm to the immediate setting, the immediate, obviously there's no direct harm to the historic fabric as such. And maybe Chris will comment later on about the glazed link and the casement doors. But I'd sort of draw your attention to the appeal case that we'd included within our statement of case. Paragraph 6.1.6, this is for 24 Main Street, Coveney. Much the same in terms of a rear extension that wasn't particularly visible from the front.
Let me just find that so I can.
Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, I was going to come on to the precedent cases later, but we've raised it. We'll got to consider it. Which is is it attached to your statement? I'm just trying to
It's
find it.
within statement of case.
Okay. So is this appendix 4? There's 4 and 5. Oh, one's the decision. 5, is that the plans? Appendix 5.
Appendix 5. Check.
Oh, that's the decision. No. Have we got any plans? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I found them.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got the plans in front of me now. Sorry, just start that bit again. So I've
Yes.
now I've
That's
got it in
fine.
front of me.
So in terms of looking at the harm, looking for a planning perspective on this one, in terms of the scale, the height, massing, and the impact from there. We obviously assigned less than substantial harm to this. And we've got the way that we apply our policies is similar to how we applied them in this particular case. Whilst it's not strictly contextually related to Pratts Green Farmhouse, it was concerned with the scale and massing, and you'll see as well the plans that were submitted that you'd requested of the elevations with the measurements drawn on with the red. And we're looking at the comparisons between the two. We've had this case come through before at this particular 24 Main Street, Coveney, where the extension would not be subservient or be uncharacteristic of the host dwelling, too large and comparable to the 2-storey elements. And for us, we were looking at the fact that this has been submitted as a single-storey extension to the property, and we're looking at a 6 metres to the ridge, which is comparable with the 2-storey gable end of the original 16th or 17th century to the east. And then if I just find the other bit, give me 2 seconds. Yeah, so the point that we sort of followed in terms of our previous cases that we've gone through in terms of our decisions to the council, is that something of a scale such as this is severely detracting from the visual experience and the setting of the listed building itself, which causes harm to the significance of the setting of that asset. And you know, the weight that should be applied to the conservation should be greater than others. And then requirement for clear and convincing justification for the reasoning as to why an extension of such size and its orientation and positioning has been is required. And in this case, we felt that that wasn't provided as such. We have obviously the design evolution that's come through from the pre-application stage. And obviously we have a reduction in size from the previous application that was withdrawn. However, the actual size of this rear extension hadn't changed from those stages. So from the outset, we'd already put in our concerns about the size scale, height and massing against ENV2 and policy ENV12, which is our listed buildings policy. And that's continued throughout.
Okay. Mr. Parkinson, do you want to come back on this case that the council's put forward and whether you feel it is or it isn't relevant to this appeal proposal?
Yeah, well, I mean, the starting point is, as with any appeal decision that's put before you, each case needs to be decided on its own merits, and that's particularly the case where you're looking at an extension to a listed building, which is so site and context sensitive and largely depends on the significance of the host building, which is going to differ from case to case. So I'd be very cautious about relying on any precedent, but in any event, looking at paragraph 12 of the appeal decision and also the plans. Then looking at paragraph 12 of the appeal decision, we can see what the inspector said, that the proposed extension would be located to the rear of the main offshoot. It would have a large size and mass, which together with the existing extension would mean that the whole rear of the building would be engulfed in extension. The large expansive roof of the extension would be particularly visible from the road, emphasising the resulting considerable extent. So it's not comparable at all here, as we talked about and we'll talk about further. The extension here is smaller than the east wing in every single way, height, width, scale, but is also importantly not visible from the road, which is where its common ground, the significance of the building is most appreciated from. The extension can't be seen from the road at all. So I would suggest very little weight can be given to this position. More generally though, just picking up what Mr. Pratts said, we said that this building cannot stand any extension anywhere. And you would have seen in the heritage statement, the advice from Historic England on this, which is very clear in conservation principles at paragraph 140, that few places are so sensitive that they or their settings present no opportunities for change. And there's no real explanation for why this building, which we heard earlier is typical in terms of size of many buildings in the district, falls within that category of few places that are so sensitive that there's no opportunity for change. Because if there's an in-principle objection here that's upheld, that would apply to many such listed buildings throughout the district, which the council recognises in its design guide are capable of being extended and have been extended through designs like this, small extensions at the rear with a glass link. So I'm sure others will have things to say, but those are my comments on the appeal decisions.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that before?
If I can, please. I'd also like to draw attention to the fact that under our Appendix 4 is the appeal decision that was submitted by the appellant themselves, the same location at 24 Main Street, Coveney, for the earlier rear extension to that property. That one was allowed, however, that was a more appropriate single scale height and scale to that property. The later decision that came through that we have attached at Appendix 5 does show where he said the ability to appreciate his significance in both appearance and plan form would be diminished I sort of bring back your attention to the L plan, although we have discussed that perhaps this is more of a description of the building. We certainly have taken that as more of a description of its significance and how it relates in terms of its plan, form and orientation. There's a quite significant extension to the rear of the property that changes that plan form. And that's all I had to say on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else the council wants? Mr. Patrick, do you want to add anything?
24 Main Street in Coveney is by no means as well preserved building as this.
In what respect?
It was subject to compulsory purchase proceedings back in the 90s. It had a rebuilt rear wing, had a new build garage, cheek by jowl with it. It had a extension at right angles off that rear wing. This was an extension in addition to the extension that had been permitted 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay. And going back to the appeal property, obviously the appeal property's got an existing, what's regarded as poor quality extension. Is there no potential in the council's view to replace that?
There's every possibility, and I would encourage anyone to replace it, remove it.
But are you saying that there's potential for an extension there that?
No, I mean, the eaves on that wing was virtually at head height. There's no easy way of extending in that location. The form of that post-war lean-to conservatory was constrained by that, and that just shows that it's an insoluble design problem.
So you suggesting that that should just be removed and not replaced by anything?
Yeah. That's the principle of reversibility. Whether it ever happens is another matter.
Anything to come back on?
Well, I mean, I think we're agreed, and Mr. Partridge said that this is the optimal place in the building for an extension. Nobody is going to remove floor space from their building without seeking to replace it elsewhere, especially in a property that's already small. And we'll come to the balance later, but it's clearly a benefit in removing an extension, which is in a prominent location and detracts from the significance of the building, and in effect replacing it with an extension that can't be seen from the public domain.
Thank you. So if we can stay with the appellant just for a moment, looking at the design in more detail. So the design access statement talks about it being a sensitively designed an extension and that it would enhance the architectural character of the building. How can you reassure me that it would be a high quality addition? I've got obviously the elevations, and I've got a detail of a typical glazed link, but how would these bespoke details be secured?
It's a difficult question to answer. At a planning stage, all I would hope we could persuade you is that, which I think we have a great deal of mutual respect actually for Chris Partick's view on many buildings, and I think he and hopefully the planning team would support the view that as architects we have a very high quality approach, and our clients come to us just for that, and would potentially persuade you to look at some of the buildings we've done that are similar, which you would be able to be persuaded that they are of all high quality. We would not want to follow suck it and see low quality solution. I think Richard and his partners have been very clear to us that they want something that is valuable, that will enhance potentially the contrast between a historic building and something that is more contemporary, which reflects the way that we all live now, from something that is cozy, warm, homely cottage, which it is, a farmhouse come cottage, to something that goes to the garden, which gives a different quality of light, a different quality of materials and experiences. all of those are what we regard as essential in a high quality building, let alone the longevity of the materials. It's difficult to persuade you we're going to produce a nice high quality building. Of course we are, but how do we prove that to you?
Exactly. My question is, you know, eaves and verge details, the plinth details, the structural glass,
These could be dealt with by condition, which I'm sure that Chris, because he has a very high quality taste, actually for buildings, and I'm sure that we could do that. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, condition 2, which is agreed, deals with the materials to be used in construction, and it's extensive. It includes brick, stone, roof covering, doors and windows, rainwater goods, roof lights, timber boarding, and they all need to be submitted to the council and approved in writing before any above ground construction takes place. That's the mechanism.
But that's just materials. That's not details of construction, is it? That's just, is it a piece of metal? Is it, you know, what type of brick it is? It's not telling me how the structure is going to be assembled and detailed.
Well, Madam, if there's anything that you wanted added into that, we would be happy to do so, which links on to my second point, which is, as you heard at the beginning, Mr. Lawson intends to live here as his family home. So he has a direct personal stake in ensuring that this is a high quality design, and that is what the policy is delivered. This isn't a volume house builder proposal. This is where he intends to live.
Well, perhaps we can come on to conditions later, because I think there are, you know, a few additional conditions that will be required so that everybody's got reassurance as to exactly what the finer details are going to look like. Okay. I wanted to query the corner post detail, because there's a slight discrepancy between the plan and the elevation. And I just wanted to be certain what I will actually see. So on the elevations, it just shows a corner post, but I think on the plan it shows more solid and less glass.
Yeah, can I comment on that? So the corner post on the where the glazing wraps around, that's we've got kind of a standard detail to that, where we have a fin of a steel plate welded to a post, which you can just about see on the corner of the dining room. On the other corner, where the more solid element is wrapping around from the east, that's the bit that you see on the south elevation. So the boarding is shown wrapping around the corner. So when you look on the south elevation on the right hand side, it's slightly more solid. On the left hand side, it would be a steel fin. So you're seeing so the two lines that you see closest to the doors would be an express steel post, and then the line in the background is the fin beyond. So it looks thicker than it actually is. That there would be a fin detail. So coming back to your earlier question about reassurance of quality, I think we'd be happy to accept to be minded to be approved.
Right.
You know, large scale details and
Photographs of some.
Yeah, and we can show photographs of similar things that we've done.
Correct.
Mm.
And similarly for example, for the detailing of the where we've got on the south gable, where we've got the boarding running in front of glazing, there's a detail that we've developed that allows the light to filter through, but also allows those to open so that you can clean the glass and things. So we've kind of thought out the details, even if we haven't drawn them.
Right, okay. Sure, Mr. Lawton would appreciate those details. I mean, you'll obviously need to work them up, won't you, nearer to the time if it's constructed. So have the council got any comments on that?
I mean, this is dependent on Snell David being retained for detailed design and supervision, but I have dealt with them elsewhere, and I have every confidence in their quality and attention to detail as architects.
Well, perhaps over the course of today, then you can be thinking about an appropriate condition for construction detail. Perhaps over lunch, you can come up with a form of wording that would be acceptable were it to allow the appeals. I note, Mr. Parkinson, you've got some design precedents that you've also suggested in your documentation. Would you like to take me through those?
I can, but these are the ones in the heritage.
Yes.
Mr. Turner might be best placed, he's familiar with the plans. That
Yeah.
Yeah, so it starts from 411, paragraph number. We've obviously discussed 24 Main Street, Copenhagen. The example obviously I've given is the extension that was consented there. And specifically the council identified no harm as arising from that. So there was no dispute about the principle of extension. In terms of the next one, the Dell, I think that the principal thing of this is that it talks about how with the extension there'll be no mistake in the form of the original structure, and it would be perfectly possible to interpret what must lie behind the proposed extension and its pitched roof. There would be no confusion about the original structure because the extension would plainly be a later addition. Moreover, the general form and massing of the extension is a pleasing composition, entirely appropriate to its position at the rear of the listed building. The other thing to talk about with the Dell is we may get onto this, well, we will get onto this later with optimum viable use, is that it talks about there's no doubting the extension will present an enhancement of the listed building and offer a living environment more appropriate to 21st century. So in this case, as I understand it, the inspector found a degree of harm, but that was arising from loss of historic fabric, which obviously isn't occurring at Pratts Green. And that inspector actually concluded that the enhancement of sustaining the optimum viable use through improving living accommodation, that would actually would balance the harm identified. Do you want me to carry on, Karen, or?
Well,
There are a lot of examples there, so I don't want
just the ones that you think are pertinent to this case, really. So just the main ones.
I think the other one then, just to briefly discuss, is the Gay Street Farm appeal, because this talks about gentrification of listed buildings not being uncommon locally, and the idea that buildings change over time, in essence, and that comes to a similar conclusion in terms of sustaining optimum viable use and improving living accommodation.
Has the council got any comments on those at all? Do you feel they're relevant?
I've been a conservation officer for 27 years. I've dealt with thousands of alterations to listed buildings. I have approved extensions to listed buildings, including in this district. There are also some absolutely catastrophic extensions to listed buildings, such as one in Dullingham, which is the worst I've seen in 27 years.
Sorry, I thought you were going to make a point.
I'm not going to name names, no. It's but it's in the back of my mind whenever I get a listed building application through.
Okay, so do you feel any of these are relevant to the appeal before us?
Not especially.
Anything else anybody wants to add before we move on? Just about going towards the end of this section, but there's just a couple more questions I want to ask. One for the council about the decision notice. It mentions a substandard relationship. I wondered what that meant.
Give me 2 seconds just to grab the decision notice. Is that for the full or the LBC?
It's
Or
both the same, isn't it?
For both.
Same wording on both.
So where it refers to substandard relationship, that is with the listed building itself. So it's the extension to the listed building.
Yeah. But what actually does substandard relationship mean? I'm unclear.
So we'd consider that. So whether it meets, does it cohesively work as an entire development? Does it work visually? Does it work physically? How does it sit within the context of the site? How does it sit within the curtilage of the site in relationship to the existing dwelling?
Okay, so it's basically saying in many respects it's unsuitable.
Yes.
Okay. And then I touched about this upon this at the start, which is character and appearance of the area. So can you just explain the reference in the decision notice to adversely affecting the character and appearance to the detriment of local visual amenity? I'm assuming that it's talking about the context in which the listed building and its extension will be viewed.
Yes. Yeah, precisely
So
that.
that's an immediate context.
The immediate
rather than a broader
context.
character and appearance.
Absolutely. Yeah, given the rural location as well, perhaps if it was in a location where it's more dense in terms of residential, then it would impact sort of wider context. But in this case, it's the immediate context.
It's a localized
Localized
character and
context.
appearance.
Yeah.
So anything, Mr. Parkinson, you want to add on that?
No, it's very helpful having that clarification, because I think Mr. Partridge has actually objects on the basis of the impact on Ashleys. So we had understood that it went beyond the heritage impact to a sort of general impact on the character and appearance of the area, but I'm very grateful that's been clarified, but that's not the case.
Okay. I want to move on to talk about internal alterations and the modernisation and repairs. Do people want a brief break before we launch into that for 10 minutes? Or should we just crack on? Crack on? Okay. Right. So perhaps if I can start then with the appellant, if we can talk about the proposed improvements to the building to make it more comfortable family home. So can you summarise the improvements for me?
Yes, of course. And this is page 12 of my statement where I've just summarised this. But I suppose the key points are the cementitious repairs that have clearly taken place, as I said, probably in the 70s, not before, and the effect, well, the harmful effect this is having actively on the historic fabric. So this isn't just routine repair that's taking place, it's actual beneficial intervention. So reversing these negative changes, improving the vapor permeability of the building. And that's obviously then going to have a really beneficial impact on the historic fabric. This extends to issues with concrete flooring, actually lifting those, having limecrete slabs. The other thing to point out is it's going to be a repair and strengthening of the existing roof structure. As I understand it, a structural engineer has concerns of a risk to the heritage asset based on a weakness in the roof structure. So that's going to be remediated. There's an element of improving living accommodation with vapor permeable insulation that's going to be installed as well. If we link that to climate emergency policy, Historic England is very strong advocates now of improving the thermal performance of listed buildings for sustainability reasons, but also it's going to improve the living accommodation markedly. There are, of course, other things so removal of modern fireplace surrounds, aspects that are later accretions that don't, in my opinion, aren't sympathetic to the character or age of the property. And then externally, there's going to be repair of the timber frame, repair to the thatch, repair to the render, specifically again removing cementitious render and having a line-based appropriate placement there. So that's kind of everything in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. And why? Sorry.
A couple of other things. I think you covered most of the things. There was a brief schedule of works that basically took away lots of the non-breathable render, the floors, and inserting sheep's wool or wood fibre insulation where access is possible. But there's also things in particular on when you visit site, if you go inside, for example, in the main front entrance door, you'll see that the floor is basically falling to pieces, the skirtings and everything else. So there's that level of general repair And then the room to the left, which will be the proposed kitchen, is in a particularly atrocious state. It's covered in some modern sort of fiberboard boarding. So there's a sort of general internal repair as well. So it's as well as the external, for example, window frames that are completely fallen to pieces. There's a lot of internal moisture penetration that's deteriorating the existing building.
Okay. I think in line with what I was talking about, construction details, I think I notice I'm jumping ahead to conditions, but there's also going to need to be some conditions regarding repairs and the upgrading work were to allow the appeal, because obviously I've got a limited schedule of works, but it doesn't really tell me about the detailed specification and the where the defects are going to be, what windows are capable of repair, what windows need to be replaced. So I think again over lunchtime, if you can get together and think about conditions were to allow the appeal for really sort of managing and controlling the quite significant renovation of the building that's been proposed.
Obviously, as architects, we go on from a stage which is this is planning and listed building consent stage to a detailed design and construction stage. And as architects, we draw everything, we specify everything. Now, what this is about is to what level you want us to do that for conditions. We would be doing that anyway in the course of this detailed design stage. So we're more than happy for you to list what is appropriate that you feel should be evident maybe at an earlier stage, but certainly by the time we would have finished what we call our stage 4, there would be very, very many details showing what is the insulation, which windows will be repaired, which will be replaced, whether the skirtings are this shape or that shape, what is happening to the slab, etc., etc. There will be a very, very thorough set of drawings. So, and I'm sure that, again, there's confidence in both directions on the available drawings and material. The key thing is how one wants to tie some of that into a condition on the list.
Yes, we'll definitely need some conditions really, so that we have a total understanding of the extent of the works and to make sure that it's appropriate and does the job once and for all, hopefully.
Sorry, could I add one other thing?
Yeah.
The specification of works that accompany the application is fairly general, but it will need further work when we're able to do more opening up. For example, in what we're proposing as the kitchen, once we take off that boarding, we'll have a much better idea of what's going on. So it's written as a general kind of guide to the principles, but there's a lot more work to do in terms of opening up and investigating the structure.
Yes, well, I assume one of the conditions from the council would be, to allow a certain degree of opening up in order to assess the defects and get involved in an appropriate specification and extent of repair works and replacement if necessary. So,
I mean, we would generally informally agree to a certain amount of opening up without any consents. Everything that I've heard is good conservation practice. There's no dispute on that. It could be captured in an expanded schedule of works that we'd condition.
okay, thank you, that'd be helpful. I just wanted to touch upon the layout of the building. I wondered why the existing layout is poor, because I'm assuming that the kitchen is currently in its historic location, is it? Am I right in saying that?
So, no, I'm just pulling up the plan. So there's a phase plan. Clearly, there's been changes to the room uses, but it's in the northern bay, the core northern room. There's a baking oven in that space, which is indicative of that being a kitchen facility historically.
So I think the kitchen's already been moved. So I think the kitchen's been moved from where it was historically.
Yeah, that was my question. So it's moving from where is the kitchen now? I've only got the proposed ones. Is it where the snug accessible bedroom is? Is that, yeah.
Sorry, the point I was making, maybe you've got this, so apologies if so, but I think it's already been moved once in the past.
it used to be. So yeah, it used to be north, in what is now the sitting room, the north room.
Yeah, because there's a old bread oven there, but that's been a sitting room for years. So
Okay.
it's already moved once.
Ah, okay.
Where the kitchen is now, that reads as what was the open hall that's been sealed at a later stage, and then kitchen has gone in after that as well.
Ah, I see. Okay. And so why the need to relocate the kitchen? Is it to connect it with this dining room so that it flows through?
Which it's because of trying to find the least harm to the, what you might call, to the shape of the building, the extension to the rear, etc. It makes much more sense, particularly with sort of what you might call the way that people live now, where you need a slightly larger space, often is relating to the kitchen. And because we need to put the extension where we're putting it, it negates, it obviously it means that the kitchen really needs to be located where we have proposed it.
Okay. Is the council happy with the internal layout? Apart from the.
Well, as it stands,
obviously.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, assigning different uses to different compartments within the plan form doesn't really have a huge amount of impact on the significance of the building.
So you don't have an issue with the relocating the kitchen from one part of the building and its services to another?
Not in principle. I mean, clearly drainage, pipe runs are the main impacts. Actual fittings are generally fairly reversible. It's not insurmountable. We need some thought about how it were serviced, but you know, it wouldn't be an in principle objection.
And again, is that something that you would attach conditions to? Because I haven't seen any so far.
I mean, it really depends on how invasive it might be. I mean, we have a discussion with the architects as to where their pipe penetrations would be. I mean, it's not generally something we'd condition. I mean, it's rolled into the design.
Okay. But there's things like ventilation ducts that I haven't got details of.
If it needs it, I mean, most domestic kitchens don't need forced ventilation. But again, it's relatively small scale, it's a small volume, so we'd look at that if we needed to.
Okay. And if we can just briefly talk about accessibility within the building, how's it, what are the constraints at the moment? Because I understand that you're looking to get wheelchair access into the building. So I was just trying to just understand what the barriers are at the moment and what you're looking to achieve.
Yeah, sure. So the issue at the moment is that my father's in a wheelchair, so he can't stay at the house because there's no bathroom with a shower or bath on the downstairs. There's only one upstairs. So one of the things we wanted to do is create a shower area downstairs that he can use. Also, he needs to sleep downstairs because obviously he can't get up the stairs. So also part of the thinking overall was obviously if when we've got my parents as guests, they're going to be at least my father's going to be limited to the down floor space only. So that's partly driven why we've been trying to do things that we have. Also, there's quite an aggressive step down. Oh yeah, sorry. If you've got the plan, so the
Are we looking at the existing or the proposed?
this is the proposed.
Yeah.
Drawing 310.
Yeah.
So we've got a study which is sort of what I need an area so I can work. There's actually quite an aggressive step down into that study, so he can't really get into that in his wheelchair. So that room was sort of ruled out for him. That's why we've put the snug accessible bedroom as the next room along. I don't know if you can see that one.
Yeah, I can see that.
And basically that whole area, as you navigate through, the idea is that would all be on one level. So he can get through into the utility, which has the shower room there. And it can also be sort of made more private, so it can be a bigger space, but essentially he'll be able to get into the shower on the right hand side of his wheelchair, and the toilet on the left. Area as to get dressed, showered, to sleep in the snug room. Then you can get into the living room. There's a little bit of a lift, but he can get over that in his wheelchair, because we've tried it. And then you go through into the kitchen, and then put one of the reasons for the extension as well. So there'd be more of an area there that he can sort of navigate around in. He's got quite a chunky electric wheelchair. So that's sort of what we had in mind. So
Okay.
it essentially so that someone can, when they're a guest, live downstairs.
And the existing doorways are large enough, are they, to get a wheelchair through?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I just wanted to explore the Limecrete floor a bit more, because obviously that's quite a significant intervention on the ground floor. And I haven't got any details before me that I can see. Could you explain how the Limecrete floor would be installed? And that's got heating in it, underfloor heating in it as well.
Yeah, so the typical detail that we're using nowadays has a insulated glass or expanded clay, which gives some insulation. It also stops the capillary action, so that's what provides the damp proofing. And then there's geotextile membranes, but no damp proof membrane. And then the Limecrete slab sits directly on top of that. And there's a grid system that allows you to put underfloor heating pipes at the bottom of the Limecrete if required. And we're tending to do that just with the Limecrete slab, which is also combined with the screed. So there was an earlier phase where you'd have a separate Limecrete screed, but nowadays it tends to be just the glass insulation in the Limecrete. So it's relatively straightforward. And we're proposing it in areas basically where we think there's a concrete floor. So it's namely on the proposed plan, it's the study. And that's because, excuse me, you'll see on site when you visit that there's been some repairs to the sole plate on that front cable elevation. So we think probably that at the same time that was done in the 70s, 80s, it was probably a concrete floor put in. And it looks as if there's a concrete floor simply in what will be the existing kitchen, the proposed accessible bedroom. It looks as if the peg is in that area laid on concrete. So it's just to reverse those concrete slabs that were put in some time ago and put in the Limecrete construction.
So would the Limecrete floor go across the whole of the ground floor, or
just in those two areas, I think. The other areas, the later 18th century wing appears to have suspended timber floors, so those would be retained as timber
right?
floors.
Repaired, yeah.
Yeah.
There's,
Though you'll see.
there's a mention of stone slabs coming up. Is that part of the historic surfacing, or?
I can't remember which area those in. Sorry, where does it say?
I think. My reading of it suggested that it was the whole of the ground floor that was going to be lined.
No, it's just the original hall house area. So the front part, the study, I think has got probably a concrete floor from when the sole plate repairs were done. The current kitchen has a the sort of patterned floor tiles.
No, that's the.
Oh, that's so yeah. So the proposed utility, which is the existing bathroom, that's got a sort of patterned tile. So again, I think that's probably a new floor when the bathroom was put in, and I suspect the kitchen is the same. So it's that strip across there that we're talking about, the Limecrete, and I'm, as I say, I'm assuming that they're concrete, but subject to investigation.
Okay.
The 18th century wing is a timber framed. Sorry, a suspended timber floor.
So you won't be interfering with that, no?
No, as I say, when you walk in that entrance between what's the proposed kitchen and living room, it looks as if it's in very poor condition. The whole skirting in the back of there is rotting away, so we may have to kind of repair.
Yeah. So will you excavate down to a greater depth than the existing?
No, I
concrete
mean,
floor?
I don't think we've done any, we haven't done any trial holes at the moment. There is a structural engineer's report, but it didn't involve any trial holes at the moment. Again, we're assuming because of the sole plate repairs in the study area that there's probably already some underpinning in that location. I think the earlier application refers to underpinning as well. So we're assuming there's some foundations there. Elsewhere, it will be subject again to some trial holes. Where we have done this in the past and we have found shallow foundations, quite often there are no foundations at all, it's just a brickwork going down. We limit the depth so that we don't undermine any of the foundations.
Okay.
And that's why also we've started using just the limecrete slab on its own, because it means we can then minimize the depth of any excavation. Again, obviously subject to further investigation.
Okay, thank you. So would the council be looking at conditions for those works?
Yeah, or included in the schedule of works. Again, limecrete floors are fairly well-established technology. We've certainly approved them elsewhere.
Okay. Was there anything else anybody wanted to talk to about repairs or the upgrades, the interior before I move on? No. No. Okay. The garden wall, if we can just touch on briefly. Perhaps you can explain to me what the proposal is for the garden wall.
Yeah, the basic idea is that there's an existing low-level flint and brick wall that runs around two sides, the garage side and along the front, and then it turns into a hedge. So the proposal is to add a similar low-level wall on the west side, just to enclose the front garden. Just to sort of complete the walls, if you like, and also to provide a more sheltered front garden, which was partly to do with there's deer free roaming at the moment, so that you can actually have some planting at the front which won't be nibbled by the deer, and just to complete the enclosure of the front garden.
Okay. And does the council have any comments on the wall? Are you satisfied that you've got enough information?
It depends on the quality of the workmanship. It's the sort of thing we'd probably condition sample panel for. Very few people alive nowadays can build flint mass walling.
Yeah, I mean, we would do the same. We normally insist on a metre square of flint wall to be approved by us and the conservation area, and we'd probably use the flint workers that we know from Burwell.
Just to say that is actually an agreed condition. Can't find it, but
Yeah, I've seen, I'll come on to that when we talk about conditions. I was just trying to make sure that if I were to allow the scheme, we would know exactly what it's going to look like and its height and its what the coping is going to look like. It looks like we've got gates in it, so we'll need pillars. So I would have thought that a condition relating to the actual appearance of the wall as well as its construction would be helpful.
Yeah, 1 to 20 part elevation would be sufficient for that.
So maybe over lunchtime, if you can think about a suitable condition for that, that would be helpful. Thank you. I think we've probably explored all the proposal in some detail. Is there anybody wanting to say anything before we talk about any level of harm? Okay, so perhaps if we can start with the council then, please. Can you just summarise your view of the heritage harm and its level, please?
I think it's pretty well established now that the test for substantial harm to a listed building is not far short of demolition. That isn't the proposal here. As I say, the objection has always been to an in principle alteration rather than its detail. Our position would be that it's less than substantial harm in MPPF terms. There isn't really a Richter scale below that for quantifying it. I've seen consultants construct various formulae as to slightly less than substantial or marginally less than substantial. None of that exists in the MPPF. We've only got two choices, but yes, we would say it's less than substantial harm, which needs to be weighed against public benefits.
Okay, and that's arising from the principle of the extension. You're happy with the design?
Yeah, there's never been any dispute on the design
Yeah.
quality. It's always been about whether the building needs or benefits from an extension at all.
Yeah. So so it's not just about where the extension is, it is the principle of an extension on that building
Yes.
of any size.
Yeah.
Okay. And would you like to come back on that?
Yes, well, I'll just do our position first. Our position is overall the proposal as a package of work is beneficial. If we sort of divide it into three elements, it's agreed that the internal and external repairs are a heritage benefit. It's agreed that the removal of the existing extension is a benefit. And our position is that the extension is neutral in its effect. So overall, there's a benefit. Just in terms of the council's position, I mean, the MPPF doesn't refer to categories within less than substantial, but the PPG does suggest that it would be useful to have an indication on where in that spectrum it is. And it's particularly important, I would suggest, in a case like this, where there may be a need to do, if you do find harm from the extension, a balance of that against the heritage benefits. So it may be helpful for the council to indicate where in the spectrum of less than substantial harm the extension lies, to assist in, if you do find harm, balancing that against the benefits.
Would you like to make a comment on the sliding scale?
Well, there isn't a sliding scale, I see.
I was just to make an extra point, so the crux of our argument in terms of the level of harm was that we are fully believe that the dwelling as existing is in its optimum viable use as it stands, and has done for the last 400 years without extension, except for the permitted development of that lean-to extension on the side elevation. And you know, we appreciate the accessibility issues the appellant has put forward. But it's really looking at the harm that's been applied by the displacement of a single room, which could quite easily be utilised or created within the existing historic form of the building without the need for this extension. So in terms of the package of works, in terms of the internal and external restoration, that's not something that's ever been disagreed. It is, however, the argument, the optimum viable use that this building is in and will remain in with or without the extension.
Yeah, I mean, just go back to that. I mean, paragraph 9.5 of the statement of common ground is relevant to optimum viable use because it's accepted and agreed that the farmhouse is in poor condition and is in need of significant repairs and renovation before it's able to provide an adequate standard of accommodation as a family dwelling house. Now, the package of internal and external works deliver those significant repairs. So it appears to be common ground that actually the building's either not in optimum viable use or needs the works that's delivered by this proposal in order to be so. But in some ways, optimum viable use is also a bit of a distraction here because regardless of whether the building is in optimum viable use or not, or needs the works, it's common ground that the works are heritage benefits. the removal of the existing extension is a heritage benefit. It detracts from significance. So even if it's not needed for this building to operate as a family dwelling house, it's a heritage benefit that needs to be taken into account and offset against any harm that you find.
So is there agreement that the optimal viable use is as a dwelling as it currently is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's whether the works are needed in order to sustain it in that use, or
Sustain it.
bring it back into that use, yeah. Sorry, just on that, the PPG refers to benefits as being works that either enhance significance or sustain significance. So these works would sustain the building in its optimum viable use, as is agreed at paragraph 9.5.
okay, let's look at the public benefits and heritage balance then.
Sorry,
Yeah,
can I just, I think from, yes, we accept the internal, changes with regard to the listed building are generally acceptable, subject to find the details.
Yeah.
However, those could be carried out independently of having an extension. And I think that's what we're trying to say, is that just because we can say the internal works are acceptable, that doesn't mean to say we're going to accept an extension that we consider detracts from the main dwelling. I think that's quite an important thing to say.
I think the point is whether the internal works go above and beyond what a normal owner or new purchaser would undertake. So in what respect are the works over and above standard repairs for a listed building?
I suppose I would say that general maintenance is like for like repair in essence. It's it can be a grey area in terms of whether you need even listed building consent if you're making a like for like repair. In this case, clearly it's not like for like, because you're removing those cementitious repairs. You're using lime mortars as replacement. That's just one of the examples. You're removing, for example, UPVC rainwater goods and replacing those with a alternative material heritage-led system. I suppose that's just everything. You're going to go into any more detail.
Well, let's just run through the public benefits then.
Yeah.
So, I appreciate from the appellant's position that they see there's no harm, but if I were to find harm, can you just talk me through those public benefits associated with the development and the works? And as we go along, if you can give me an idea what weight I should give to each of these. So we're looking at repairs, renovation and upgrade, the extension. If you can just put it together in a list for me and weight it if you can.
Sorry, I'm just pulling up the relevant part of my statement. I mean, in terms of the internal external repairs, that's been described in my statement, in the statement of case, as being significant benefit.
And just on those, what makes those works above and beyond what any owner would have to undertake?
I think in terms of removing those ongoing risks, so the fact that previous repairs, again, going back to cementitious repairs and impeding vapor permeability, that's an ongoing threat to the historic fabric that's only going to get worse over time. Also, strengthening the roof structure, that's the structure as it is an ongoing risk, the structural integrity of the building.
But any owner would have to do that, I assume, to protect their property.
Yeah, well, it depends what building they buy and whether that roof structure is robust enough already. Obviously, in this case, it's not, so that is an ongoing risk.
Okay, what about any other benefits?
If we move on to the side extension, so it's common ground that currently detracts from the significance of the listed building, so therefore removing it is going to be an enhancement.
What weight would you give to that?
Significant weight. And then in terms of the new extension, it's whether we just go briefly back to those precedent appeal decisions, the notion that if you enhance, you improve living accommodation, making a building fit for 21st century living, that can actually be considered to be an enhancement. But as I understand it from those appeal decisions, that was given a much smaller level of weight. But in the instance of the Dell appeal decision, there was just, as I said, there was just to be harm from removal of historic fabric that isn't occurring here. And even that small level of benefit was considered to outweigh that harm, which isn't even arising here.
Okay. Is there any others to add to the list?
I'd probably go into landscaping, the installation of French drains. That's going to also support egress of water away from the listed building, so that's going to be beneficial. I think that covers everything broadly, unless you can think of. Yeah, I just to go back to energy efficiency. Yeah, in the context of Historic England's guidance, that's very much advocated at the moment, as in the context of climate emergency, improving not only living standards within the building, but also in terms of sustainability and performance.
I'll just add that I think we would say that any one of those benefits alone would be enough to outweigh any harm that you did find from the extension, but
Any one of those alone would be
Yeah.
sufficient to tip the balance
to tip the
if
balance
any harm was found.
if any harm was found. But perhaps the most obvious is the removal of the existing modern extension. It's agreed to be unsightly, but just going back to where we started and the assessment of the significance of the farmhouse. We talked about how the architectural interest is primarily in the northern elevation and experienced in views from Malting End. Removing that extension will enhance the significance by removing a distracting element in those public views on the lane, and removing a distracting feature is clearly a benefit, and we would say a benefit that would outweigh on its own any harm that you find from the extension at the rear.
Thank you. Does the council want to come back on anything?
Clearly, all the works of the fabric are beneficial. But I have to say they are the sort of works that I'd expect anyone taking on a historic building to be doing as a matter of course. It's in their interests, it's in the interests of the building. I deal with many people who are doing works like that, but they're not proposing extensions to justify them. Removal of the lean-to, again, that's an unequivocal benefit, but it is a relatively small thing. And again, it's the sort of thing I'd expect any responsible owner to be removing as a matter of course. Whether it's a significant benefit, because it ultimately it's a relatively small scale structure. It's by no means the most detrimental addition you'll find on a listed building in this district, but a benefit in itself. The extension is a wholly private benefit. There's no intrinsic benefit to the building. There's no public benefit.
Anything further you'd like to add?
I think just to say as well, in terms of benefits from landscaping, energy efficiency, that's something we'd expect on any development application that would come in, but wouldn't necessarily be afforded any weight that would tip the balance. And especially so that we wouldn't agree that anyone individually could be enough to tip the balance in this case, and certainly not in terms of the extensions. As Chris has said, it's an entirely private benefit on that part.
Okay, thank you. So if the appeal wasn't allowed, what would happen to the building? Would it continue as it is? Would it deteriorate? That's
So the best person to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously something would have to be done to make repairs so it can be lived in. But I think there's sort of a difference between a sort of what I would regard as ongoing repairs or patching things up, and the idea of this project was to do everything in one go, and the kind of repairs I think that are necessary is that they can't really be sort of isolated. It's there are problems with, as Alan mentioned, the water ingress down. It's going to need it's going to be a massive project to fix it, and that's one of the reasons I think this is all part of the same thing. It's different to someone just doing maybe ongoing repairs as and when necessary. We're also playing catch up a little bit because it hasn't been repaired for so many years. So I mean, hopefully you'll see it more when you see the property, but it's a really large scale project.
thank you. That's helpful.
In support of Richard and indeed many clients, there's the need to spend a considerable amount of money. Money is not necessarily an issue that we're debating here, but in order to spend a significant amount of money repairing a historic building, there has to be a benefit sometimes to the client, apart from it just looking better and maintaining itself for longer. And that is often a debate that we have with our clients at the time when they're designing and weighing up the pros and cons of a particular solution. And Richard and his family have obviously invested in purchasing this property, not with the thorough knowledge of how much work is going to be required. And we have yet to have a detailed conversation with Richard and his clients, and his family, about how much actually this will cost, because we don't know yet, because we will need to open up, we will need to know which timbers are rotten, which aren't. And any purchaser, if Richard, and that highly likely, wouldn't necessarily want to stomach the amount of money to spend on this building without having the benefit of an extension of this small scale to actually benefit from and enhance his living there. It is something that is a lot to ask of any individual.
If I could just add to that as well,
Certainly.
some sort of feedback that we received. I mean, I think a lot of people were put off the property because of the scale of work that needs to be done. And I appreciate this is not an issue about money, but it's the kind of project that is going to take a lot of money. And one of the reasons I bought the property is, as I said earlier, to hopefully give something back and to repair it. But I know a lot of purchasers were just put off by the sheer scale of it, the repair work that needs to be done. So I felt I was sort of stepping in to help that. And I think it's also one of the reasons that the previous owner had to sell the property, because I don't think she could take on the scale of work that needed to be done.
Thank you. So if we can go back to the council, how, obviously you've been presented with a package of benefits. How could those benefits be secured and linked to the extension? Because at the moment, I don't see any way of, there's no conditions to suggest how the package of proposals could be pulled together.
So I think from our point of view, yes, that we could do some more work on the conditions to bring the package together. But I think I think everything that needs to be done could be done without the need for an extension. And I think that's always been our sort of starting point. There's no public benefit for the extension. And as Chris has already said, it is a personal benefit. And we have to look at the building, not just today, it's what it was in the past and the future. And it's making sure that it's there for the future. And what is the benefit of the extension in the public realm? There is none. So we don't see that the need for the internal works is dependent upon the provision of an extension, but we would, with regard to conditions, we would certainly look at making sure that that schedule of works is cohesive and manageable and controllable through conditions.
Okay.
If I could just come back on that, because it's relevant to the K case, which we put in at the beginning, which deals with a situation similar to this, where there are a number of works for which planning permission and listed building was sought, all of which were capable of being carried out separately. And the inspector found benefits arising from some of those works and harms arising from others, but didn't weigh them all together. And the judgment's clear that where there is an interrelationship between works that's put forward, even if they're capable of being carried out separately, where they are interrelated and connected, it's necessary to balance the benefits that are found from some components. So, for example, here, the demolition of the existing extension against the harm found from other elements. So, yes, I mean, strictly speaking, it may be possible to construct the extension without carrying out the internal and external repair works. I don't know if anyone would ever do that, but that is possible. But that's not the test here. The test is, are these works interrelated? And we would say that they clearly are. They're a package of works to renovate and improve the building, to bring it into a standard of accommodation fit for a family dwelling house. So that's the first interconnection between all of the works, but they're also connected in terms of proximity. So the extension is on the south elevation. There are improvements to the windows and the thatching, etc., on that elevation. And the existing western extension can be seen from the rear garden. So demolition of that would improve the appearance of that extension as seen from the rear garden. And all of those factors were relevant in K at paragraphs 39 to 43 that we referred to in the email on Friday, which led to the conclusion that the inspector should have considered and offset the benefits of some components against the harms identified from other components.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on that?
Just very briefly, just in respect to the case of K, where the appellants very helpfully created a summary for us in terms of that harmful components where there is a relationship between the works. We are strictly of the belief that there is no relationship between the extension works and that of the renovation to the listed building. And also we would not consider that to be part of enabling development for this listed building in this case. There would be no reasoning for why the works to the inside in terms of the rearrangement of the layout could not be done within the existing historic form, especially in the case of the level of harm that we've assigned to the provision of an extension.
Thank you.
I mean, I'd just say that the examples of connection given in K are very broad. So, for example, elements in an application may be connected where, this is paragraph 39, the purpose of putting the individual elements into a single application is to enable the decision maker to balance the benefits and harms. So that may be enough in of itself to create a connection, or where the works are to the same listed building, or where they are in close proximity within that building. So it's not as simple, and it would be wrong to treat it as, well, you can do the improvements without the extension. The question is there a relationship in the broadest sense between these works? And there clearly is. It's part of the same project. It's works to the same listed building. They've been put together within the same application so that they can be considered together. And so that potentially, if you do find harm, that could be weighed against the benefits. And geographically, the works are within close proximity to each other. So it would be quite wrong to say, well, you could demolish the extension, the western extension, without getting permission for a new extension to the rear. I mean, obviously somebody could. That's not the test.
Okay. And would the test assume on some kind of condition tying all the works together? Because at the moment, I have no way of tying the renovation works to the extension. So I assume there would need to be a condition linking everything together with a completion date.
And there could, if there was a condition, that would be enough to certainly to link them together. I think applying the approach taken in K, even without a condition, there's still enough interrelationship between the works here to show that they are connected.
But how could you be certain that the works would then be undertaken?
Well, I mean, the council's never suggested a condition in this case. If they did want a condition, which, for example, required the western extension to be demolished before the new extension could be brought into occupation, something like that, then we'd be willing to consider it. But it's never been suggested.
No, but I think with the emphasis that's been given on, you know, this package of works,
Yeah,
I think it would follow that you would need something that pulled them all together at the end and gave you.
well, I think that condition would only be necessary if it was found that there was harm from the extension.
Yes.
If there was no harm from the extension, then
Yes.
there would be no need to have a condition requiring the other improvements to be carried out. If there was harm found from the extension, then we don't need to take instructions, but we'd be willing to enter into a condition that secured everything together. How that's worded is something that maybe we could add to our list
Yeah.
to discuss over lunch.
Yeah,
But that would be.
I think that would be very helpful. That's
Yeah.
really quite, you know, it's quite important. If I were to find harm, there needs to be some way of looking at, you know, how these benefits could be delivered. Is there anything further?
Sorry, no, I was just speaking aloud, thinking, I'm just thinking aloud here, so please bear with me. Thinking of how other developments have done when you're trying to ensure something happens and ensure that it's completed satisfactorily and within a timescale, and it's done because it's reliant on something else. It's normally done through like a section 106 rather than a condition. So sorry, that's why I'm thinking
Yes,
out
thinking
loud,
out loud.
whether or not the condition would be sufficient to enable that control. That's just a
Well, maybe you
question.
can have a think about that over lunchtime, because obviously we haven't got the benefit of a 106 before us.
I mean, I'll just say on that, I think that's often where what you need to be carried out first, say infrastructure improvements are off-site. So you need to secure it through the section 106, but here everything is within the red line boundary of the site, so there'll be no issues there in terms of securing it through conditions. But we can talk about that over.
I mean, you could have a phasing condition, couldn't you, to say
Yeah.
that X works are going to be completed before this starts?
I think if you were to go down the phasing route, what happens if they don't complete those works in that specified time? Does the permission then fall away?
I don't think we have a time limit on it, that should be difficult, but it would require work to be carried out in certain order with the extension to the opinion at all. I think we can
Discuss that over lunch. Shall we go through the conditions that we've got before us at the moment? And then I can perhaps leave you to ponder over lunch some additional conditions? Was there anything anybody else wanted to add before we launch into conditions? Have we?
Very briefly, that I think what Mr. Hodgkins has said very clearly that you need the conditions and the relevant conditions relate to whether you consider their harm of the extension. We, as architects, we do much of this work, and onerous conditions of this sort rarely exist, because I think when you visit the property, you will realize that it would be a very strange thing to do, is to build a high quality extension and then not do the works to the house, which clearly make it uninhabitable at the moment. They are inherently linked in that respect. And I think it's about judgment here, and not punishing people for want to improve a property. And that's where I would, in a non-legal way, your judgment, or want your judgment on, because I think whilst we will do absolutely everything to protect the historic fabric of the building and enhance it for the future years, to have it set out in an order there needs to be a very good reason to do that in a way that is different to every other project that we are working on. I can't see why we would have to go down such an enormously onerous route to secure quite a reasonable, modest extension to a listed house.
I think it's because of the package of benefits that sit alongside it, because it's a balance, isn't it, really? And it's just everybody needs certainty as to what's.
But as has been established, the package of those benefits, either for or against this scheme, will have to happen. And they do have to happen on these sorts of buildings anyway.
Okay. Did you want to add anything before we go on to conditions?
The only thing I would add, which I think this point you already have, which is that we say that the extension is neutral in its effect. So we don't need to worry about any of these conditions because we don't have to rely on the package.
Yeah.
It's only if this is found that there's harm from the extension that these sorts of issues come into play.
Yeah. Okay. So in the event that I do find harm, there'll obviously be some additional conditions which we might add to this list, but we'll go on to the ones that are before us in the statement of common ground. Starting with the planning conditions. So I understand that some are agreed and some are not agreed. Most are self-explanatory. And were I to allow the proposal, I might make some changes in accordance with the tests. So the planning permission, I haven't got any questions about the timing condition. We don't appear to have a plans condition. That needs to be added. Decision. Okay. I assume you'd be happy with the plans condition. Yeah. So number 2, facing materials, which we've touched upon already. So I can see that there's a revised agreed position. So are the council happy that this condition will encapsulate all materials? Because I can see that it's been changed to allow certainty, but I'm just a little bit concerned that there may be some materials that aren't in that list which need to be approved. And when we come onto the listed building consent, obviously that will need to be internal materials as well. I can't see paving or paths. Would anybody have a problem with me just keeping it as the council's condition was, which is keeping it more general to the details of materials to be used? Because I'm just a little bit worried that it's tying everybody's hands too much by being so specific.
I think the reason for the change is just to provide certainty on what details need to be provided. So the current draft says including. So we tried to move it to a list that's exclusive, so that Mr. Norton knows what he needs to provide to the council up front.
I mean, in my experience, the standard one is the council's one, which is just external facing materials. And we'd also need to demonstrate colour and finish as well, not just what the materials are. So I think I would be more comfortable with keeping it more open-ended, just so we're encapsulating everything. Okay. All right, thank you. So conditions 3 and 4 are not agreed. So can somebody explain to me what the problem is with 3 and 4? I think
It's us that have the issue with the original draft. So the issue is, I mean, as we set out in the table, that we consider the conditions are unnecessarily detailed and burdensome. We accept that there's a need for an arboricultural method statement. And we accept that there's need for a scheme of protection of trees during planting. The concern is the very detailed list of what those documents need to include in circumstances where the original arboricultural impact assessment is quite clear that the extension doesn't encroach within the root protection areas of any trees that has been contained. And in those circumstances, having detailed requirements, so for example, full specification for the construction of any roads in relation to root protection areas, where the extension doesn't build within the root protection area. So that's why we've suggested a simpler version, which is prior to the commencement of development, a tree protection plan, an arboricultural method statement that will detail how those retained trees that be protected from harm during development shall be submitted and approved in writing by the LPA, without specifying in huge amount of detail what those documents should include, including elements which aren't relevant to this proposal. It's just simpler. And if the council wants to come back and say, well, actually, you need to provide X, Y, and Z detail, then they can, rather than having a requirement to submit those up front in a condition.
So the amended condition that we have is done by our trees officer. That's his standard template that he uses from the London Tree Officers Association. That's where he has sort of taken his from. This has been made slightly shorter. And there is a caveat within the condition that says that only those relevant to the application should be submitted to. So although it is wordy, it sort of provides the entire picture rather than going from our perspective of being too little and then having to require more. That's why it's in a situation that it is.
Okay. Did you say this condition says only relevant to the?
Yes, so in the far right column, approximately halfway down, specific issues to be dealt with within TPP and AMS as relevant to the site, and then it lists under A, B, C in alphabetical order those that could be submitted, but you only choose the ones that are relevant.
Okay. Is there anything further you want to add? No.
Conditions as straightforward as possible, and having a standard and a condition which simply says provide what's relevant to the site, but no indication of what's relevant and what's not relevant. It doesn't really provide that guidance. So our approach to submit is simple and doesn't specify anything that what needs to be provided. The applicant will submit the information that they consider relevant, and if the council considers more information is required, then they can say that as part of the process for discharging the condition.
Okay, I'll give that one a bit more thought, I think. Let's go on to condition 5. I'm interested to know what the anticipated harm is with installing a mezzanine.
Because it's been applied as a single story extension. And the whole, the ethos that the appellants have put forward is that it's to provide light, open. And I think it's just ensuring that's maintained. And I think if then you're starting to add more floors into it, then it's clearly no longer a single story extension. So I think it's just ensuring that it retains as approved the alleged single story nature of the proposal. And then if there are any, if there is a need for a mezzanine floor going forward, we would need to then assess any residential impacts on Ashley's and obviously the setting of the listed building if additional openings needed to be put into that roof.
But as it stands, I'm trying to understand why it will be harmful by just putting without any openings or without doing any other alterations. Would it be harmful to the listed building, or would it be harmful to the design concept, or?
I think it's the design concept. It's supposed to be single story, and I think it was a case of just ensuring that that was maintained. And obviously we discussed it with the appellant, and that was considered acceptable.
Okay.
Excuse me. I think I understand where you're coming from, and from a design point of view, I think it's an overly, although it's agreed, so fine. I think it's.
I mean, from my perspective, I didn't like the condition, if I'm honest, but just to try and.
It's overly prescriptive.
I was trying to agree as much as I could, so it's not to be fighting about it, but I didn't understand the reason for it.
I think it was agreed because there are no plans to introduce a mezzanine level, rather than because we agreed that it complied with the test for an imposition of a condition. I mean, it's hard to understand what the harm would be if an additional floor was put in, but because we didn't have any proposals to do so, quite happy to agree to it.
Okay.
And quite a few of these are agreed for all within that category of just being reasonable and trying to agree as much as we can.
Right. Okay, thank you for those comments. I'll give that some thought. Construction times, no issue with that. 7. It seems as though the council was originally talking about a brick sample panel, but then the revised wording is now talking purely about the boundary wall. So that's been agreed.
Yeah, that was purely an oversight on my half, and right in that condition, it should have related to the boundary wall in the first instance. So the one in the far right column should be the one.
Right, okay. Okay. I think I would probably add that we'd need an elevation detail in there as well, because obviously we need to secure the coping and the height and the plinth and gate posts and gates and. Are you happy with that? Yeah. We'll just run through the suggested list of building consent conditions, and then we'll talk about try and encapsulate any ones that are, I think, maybe also necessary. So list of building consent conditions. 1 is fine. 2, again, we need a plans condition. 3, again, talking about facing materials. Over that for a moment. Wall details same as we've previously discussed. Oh, windows and doors. I wondered why it was before work begins to the fabric of the listed building, because potentially you might have a situation where the extension is constructed before the council's actually agreed to the detailing of the windows and doors. I wondered why it was before work begins to the fabric of the listed building. Could that not be before before above ground works are commenced or something, so that you get those details before? Yeah. And can that also include roof lights as well? Because I don't think we've got the detail for the roof lights. So that's all of the conditions that have been specified. So over lunch, if you can get together and talk about the ones that we've already mentioned. So there's the design details for the extension. We need a condition for. Just to make sure that the scheme delivers a, the high quality extension, just for the avoidance of doubt. And those construction details, I think we need to be looking at details of eaves and verges, the flashing, what the horizontal timber slats over the glazed gable are going to look like, and the horizontal boarding, the junction with the plinth, structural glass, the zinc roof details. So if that could be encapsulated in one construction detail condition. And then looking at the refurb and upgrade, obviously we're looking at a relocated kitchen, moving services to the other side of the building where there aren't, I assume there aren't services at the moment. And we've got an ensuite going in. So I think we'll need a services, vents and ducts condition. Would you be?
The routes and services.
And also what the external ducts are going to look like. So whether, you've got, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're going to need to know what these things are going to look like, where they're going to be, but.
Lots of these things are.
Yeah, okay. And then a sort of a schedule of works really for so identifying a spec for the limecrete floor and the heating, the type of insulation to the walls and ceilings, how it's going to impact on the architraves and the timber beams.
Once again, with our detailed drawing package, which is the stage 4 package of work, all the drawings as existing and as proposed drawings and the construction drawings will be accompanied by a schedule of works because of the necessity to have it fully described and specified for any likely tendering builders.
Yeah.
So that is part of the package that would be completed.
Yeah.
And it is in our interest and our clients' interest to be as specific as possible. So the fact that that has to be submitted to the council beforehand is of no major consequence to ourselves or our client. It has to be done.
So, and that also applies to sort of schedule of timber frame repairs, method of paint removal. I notice you've got black bituminous paint on the bricks, taking that off. and a schedule of window and door replacement and repair. So I think that's everything that I've kind of picked up that I would like to see specified in a condition, if everybody's happy with those. So if you could consider that over lunch. I don't think there's anything unusual about that, is, you know, it's the type of conditions we see time and time again. And then also think about how those works would be tied to the extension, please. So how long do you think you need for lunch and to talk about those conditions? It's nearly 1 o'clock. So do we need half an hour, an hour?
Yeah.
So shall we start again at 2 o'clock? Is that okay with everybody? So I'll adjourn the hearing now until 2 o'clock. And then we'll go through the conditions and then talk about what we've got left to talk about, the site visit, and any concluding remarks. Okay, thank you.